Now we pour one out for the counter-revolutionary that played a role in perhaps one of the greater catastrophes of contemporary history, the dissolution of the USSR, Gorbachev. He died yesterday. Take a look.
To our major international.
Take a look at how the liberal capitalist Western media is going to cover that death.
National story today, the world is remembering the last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, died at the age of 91. He will be remembered for helping try to end the Cold War and introduce reforms that ultimately led to the breakup of his country, the Soviet state. Liz Palmer, who was a CBS News correspondent in Moscow and interviewed Gorbachev, looks back now at his place in history.
Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev set out to reform the Soviet Union, and he ended up changing the world.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In the end, the East Germans tore down the wall for themselves, but Gorbachev didn't stop them. And that was the beginning of the end of the Cold War. Born into a farming family in the Soviet Union in 1931, Gorbachev went to Moscow to study law and joined the Communist Party. In the 1980s, as the youngest ever Secretary General of the party, he set out to reform an inflexible, inefficient Soviet system. He engaged with the U.S. and in 1987 signed a momentous nuclear reduction treaty.
Mr. General Secretary, though my pronunciation may give you difficulty, the maxim is dovayai no provayai. Trust but verify.
In 1990, Gorbachev won the Nobel Peace Prize, but his economic reforms weren't working, and Soviet citizens were going hungry and getting angry. In 1991, hardliners organized a coup against him. Gorbachev did survive, but the Soviet Union didn't, and he had to watch its collapse from the sidelines. 20 years ago, as the Moscow correspondent, I interviewed Gorbachev. Still the optimist, thinking Putin and the U.S. could be constructive partners.
The age of empires is in the past. Both sides won the Cold War because we ended it.
And I've been thinking this...
Totally. How beneficial and fortuitous that was for the Russian people. And like everyone living in the Soviet bloc. Also, if you don't like Vladimir Putin, that ugly fuck is directly responsible, on top of course, the
So do you have
American empire and Western liberal capitalists.
You. What changed you? You grew up in an atmosphere of communism. Your grandfather was a famed communist. Your people were very involved in the communist movement. You grew up in a traditional Russian household. What changed Mikhail Gorbachev? What made you able to turn a place that didn't have freedom into freedom? What did it to you?
Well, life changed us. Efforts, attempts to reform the country, to reform our society, were made several times after Stalin's death, because what we inherited after Stalin, a totalitarian regime, repressions, the domination of one party, of one ideology, the suppression of freedom, that did not give our society, our country, enough fresh air, and therefore the country was suffocating and it needed second wind. And therefore every people who were concerned about our country tried to do something. They wanted to try some reforms. Khrushchev tried it, Kosygin tried an economic reform, but all of those were defeated because the nomenclatura always acted in a way to prevent reforms from succeeding. So we had to give a lot of thought to to how we safeguard reforms. And I understood when I thought about that. Initially, of course, I acted during the first years of reforms, I acted just like my predecessors, mostly focusing on economic reforms, on industry, agriculture, etc. But then we saw that when we really wanted to push the reforms forward, the system, the nomenclature began to resist, began to sabotage that process. And not just the party nomenclature, but also the management nomenclature. And I decided, I concluded as a result of that, that we would lose, just like the previous reformers, like Kosygin and Khrushchev, if we don't implement democratic changes, if we don't have free elections.
But you decided to do what they didn't do. You took them on. You didn't have to take them on. You could have lived the life of a typical Soviet president. Why did you take them on?
Well, no. This, I think, would be someone other than Gorbachev if I did not take them on. My experience, my convictions, my education, my pain and my feeling about my country and my people, all of this was growing on me. And over the years, I became angry. I became unhappy about what was happening in the country, how we were treating our people, our citizens. And for me, initially it was some unhappiness, but then it became real.
And then they told me, you put cheese inside the crust. And said, you can't out-pizza the Hut. And I said to myself, maybe you are right. I will give this a try. I have never seen in all my years cheese inside the crust. Only cheese on top, not inside. This was a very special pizza.
Really an opinion, a view. But initially I thought that the system could be improved, and I began by trying to improve the existing system. And then I thought that we have to change the system, to replace the system. It cannot be improved.
Was it difficult to open doors to the United States? Because you had to be raised with feelings about the United States like we were raised with feelings about the Soviets. Was that hard to open that door?
Very difficult. I think maybe that was the hardest thing. And if we, in moving from Geneva to Reykjavik to Washington to Moscow, in trying to understand the positions of each other, in studying each other, if we had not believed each other, then I think if we had not established human rapport, then we wouldn't have been able, I think, to develop real cooperation, real work together. It was hard. When President Reagan and I first began to talk, we were together just like you and I today, at a small table, and President Reagan began to accuse me, human rights violations. He said, you have no democracy. He said, you need to make these changes in foreign policies and these changes, etc., etc. And my answer when our dialogue began to go that way was, Mr. President, you are not a prosecutor and I'm not an accused. Let us not lecture each other. We represent big countries. Let us speak as equals. I think that then we will be able to find...
I mean, even if you don't know anything, the immediate red flag should be that, I mean, he was handed a awful predicament regardless, if I'm going to be as charitable as possible. And his actions, some may say, would have happened regardless, no matter what, caused, as Dave Legg, third end, or Dave Legend is correctly pointing out, caused millions of deaths of despair, child prostitution, hunger, deprivation. Russia's GDP dropped by 40%, real wages halved, poverty ballooned from 2.2 million in 1987 and 88 to 66 million in 1993 to 95. Millions died under the brutal regime of privatization and shock therapy. 500,000 women were trafficked into sexual slavery. Does Gorbachev have hold sole responsibility? Of course not. It was just a feeble culmination of a revisionist current in Soviet governance that made increasing accommodation to capitalist interests, but he presided over the final capitulation, and that is his weight to bear. Does Gorbachev bear the primary responsibility? No. Since the 1950s, the USSR faced a vicious adversary whose policy was to enormously increase the strains on Soviet governance to promote tendencies which must eventually find their outlet in the breakup of Soviet power. For a nation that had not known a moment of peace in its short existence, that was passed like a hockey puck from Wilhelmian Germany to the Entente powers, Nazi Germany to the US, there could be no space for the kind of naive concessions that Gorbachev made to the West. Yes. The biggest things you could fault him for were not bandaging the dissolution of the USSR a little bit better. It was slated to fall apart regardless, no matter what happens, because the American capitalist power, as a consequence of going back to post-World War II, like in the immediate aftermath of World War II, America's proximity to the war and lack of human capital that they lost in comparison to the USSR in the aftermath of World War II created an environment where America could immediately turn their crosshairs to the real enemy, communism, right? Very quickly. They were able to, in almost a way that Nazis wanted to also, finish the job that the Nazis wanted to start, which was the end of communism, the end of trade unionists, the end of socialists, the end of communists. America was able to literally end the Nazi regime and then take matters in their own fucking hands in a more tolerant, liberal, capitalist approach. Because fascism ultimately is a mechanism of power. It's a mechanism of control. And fascism was utilized by capital owners, both in Germany and elsewhere, to control and suppress the growing communist movements that were happening all around the post-industrial revolution world, right? So America was delivering its final blows to the crumbling, I guess, if you want to call it the empire, right? Or the crumbling hegemonic power. They, no matter who was in charge, it was slated to end. I think we were fucked over either way. The USSR crashing was just a matter of time, but the transition from it to the new order couldn't have been done by worse people. Exactly. I think the worst part is like who the criminals were, who the criminal elements were, and how they sacked this otherwise bountiful state. There's a reason why, GDP was halved. There's a reason why there were millions of child prostitutes, people selling themselves into sex slavery, and so many deaths of despair. And that is because that transitional period was basically given fully to some of the worst criminals backed by Western banks. That's also the reason why Russia is seen as this kleptocratic capitalist safe haven, this authoritarian kleptocratic capitalist safe haven. Vladimir Putin is very much a reaction to that original transition and that humiliation, and also the dire economic conditions that people were subjected to. Vladimir Putin rose from the ashes of that horrifying transition and was able to quickly rise into power. He came from that background. He was our guy. Okay? Xi Jinping on the collapse of Soviet states. Well, I know what his take is. His take is that they did not uphold the immortal Marxist-Leninist values. They were revisionist. Why did the Soviet Union disintegrate? Why did the Communist Party of the Soviet Union fall into pieces? An important reason is that in the ideological domain, competition is fierce. To completely repudiate the historical experience of the Soviet Union, to repudiate the history of the CPSU, to repudiate Lenin, to repudiate Stalin, was to wreak chaos in Soviet ideology and engage in historical nihilism. It caused party organizations at all levels to have barely any function whatsoever. It robbed the party of its leadership, of the military. In the end, the CPSU, as great a party as it was, scattered like a flock of frightened beasts. The Soviet Union, as great a country as it was, it's literally saying that they did not uphold like Stalinist principles, Marxist-Leninist principles. They were revisionist, and that's why it happened. Meanwhile, the irony is that China has never been in a more fortuitous position as a consequence, a direct consequence of revisionism and Dengist values. So the irony there is not lost on me. Perhaps one of the most successful examples, if you consider China to be a genuine transitional socialist state. Some people don't think it is. Some people do think it is. I don't think it's a legitimate transitional socialist state either. That was only maintained, and China could get to that point specifically as a consequence of Dengist attitudes. So in the end, the CPSU is a great party as it was, scattered like a flock of frightened beasts. The Soviet Union, as great a country as it was, shattered into a dozen pieces. This is a lesson from the past. Terrible take and misunderstanding of modern Marxist-Leninism. Telling me that it's a terrible take? Mao was saying that the Soviet Union dissolved and was picked apart by capitalist vultures because they did not uphold true Marxist-Leninist principles. They did not have ideological purity. They did not... Dang, not Mao. Oh, wait, what the fuck? Oh, this is Xi Jinping who said this. Yeah, what? Oh, fuck my... what am I saying? Sorry. Xi Jinping. Have I been saying Mao this entire time? I apologize. Xi Jinping said this, which is ironic, like I said. You said it once. Oh, okay. Ironic considering that the contemporary Chinese Communist Party is, again, literally at the seeing the successes that it's seen, specifically as a consequence of their application of revisionist Marxist-Leninist principles.
Well, Politico
What is this? USA Attitude? Jeffrey Sachs is like the number one. Oh shit! Jeffrey Sachs is the number. Wait, hold on. There might be like shitty. I don't know if we can watch this. Hold on. This is the number one Ukraine guy. Hold on. I'm gonna look through it real quick. But I don't know is this about Ukraine? I don't want to watch this. The number one Ukraine guy. It's about the fall of the USSR. Mao said this too. Mao said it too, chat. Yeah, by the way, this what Xi Jinping is saying is nearly identical to original Sino-Soviet split and what Mao had to say as well on revisionist Russia. So there are a lot of similarities within what he's saying. I mean, what are they supposed to do? USSR and China both have to compete with the West in order to survive. Also, she often talks about the Dengue steps in using productive force to counter the West. Yeah, I know. I'm saying, like, he's talking about ideological revisionism while he himself is like the main guy who did it, or not the main guy, but he himself is doing it currently. Anyway, there was high levels of corruption. Here's Warger. There was high levels of corruption that had developed in the USSR by the time Gorbachev took power. What people never considered that at that point reform was necessary. At the end, it was the hardliners who did the push and forced them to either choose to basically start a civil war or resign. I think ultimately he had his heart in the right place. I don't know. No matter what happens, he oversaw the death and destruction of so many people. That's because Xi doesn't reject China's foundation Mao like the USSR did with Stalin. Yeah, that's a good one. That's what happened. It's because they bit the hand that fed them. They de-Stalinized, and that's why it happened, right? That's the main reason, right, dude? Certainly, that's the reason for China's success. The reason for China's success is because they still maintain a tremendous amount of pride for Mao, whereas the USSR engaged in revisionism and also simultaneously engaged in de-Stalinization. I mean, you could make an argument about de-Stalinization as a concession, as a starting point for concessions to the West. But de-Stalinization in and of itself is not necessarily a bad issue, especially considering, as Warger also correctly pointed out, corruption being a insanely awful force that legitimately was harming the country's own mechanisms of government. CoinTelPro, thank you for the 10 get the subs. Motorface, thank you for the 5 get the subs.
Find keys to any problem. So it was difficult. But still, it became possible. Without changes in Soviet-American relations, nothing would have changed in the world.
Yeah. Champaign, Illinois for Mikhail Gorbachev on this special edition of Larry King Weekend. Hello.
Hi, Larry.
Hi.
President Gorbachev, I'm honored to talk to you.
Dude, America's such a wild country. They would just have like any random guy from Champaign, Illinois call into Larry King to talk to fucking Gorbachev. That's a crazy thing. That's how fucking dominant America is, dude. Like, can you imagine Barack Obama talking on the phone to some fucking random Russian guy on a Russian televised broadcast? No shot. This is like ritualistic humiliation.
Do you believe that communism as a political philosophy and a system has still something to offer to the world?
I think that in principle, as a system, as a philosophy, as a model of organizing a society, of reforming society, has to be rejected based on our experience, the experience of our country and of Eastern European countries. As regards the use of certain methods to achieve greater social justice, greater regulation by the state of certain social processes. There were certain useful aspects that could be used in the future as well. That's why I'm speaking of socialist values. By the way, I believe also that socialists who are in power in some countries they also use liberal theories, not just socialist theories. It's not really a choice of capitalism versus socialism. I believe that based on our experience and on the Western experience, Western values and other values, we have to conclude that what we need is a new society, a new civilization that would take advantage of all that is best and would reject all that is worst and take advantage of the good things for the new civilization together. So let us not just try to stamp out everything. We have to reject what did not work.
Let me get a break and come
in
back.
our country.
Let's go back to your calls. Rotterdam, Holland. Hello.
Oh, hi, Larry.
Hi.
My question is, if Mr. Gorbachev had known that perestroika would lead to the disintegration of the Soviet Union, would...
Wait. Why is everybody calling from like random... Wait, what? Rotterdam, Holland? Also, even the guy from fucking Champaign, Illinois. That motherfucker had an accent too.
Would he still have supported it the way he did?
No, I don't think that this was our plan. And it was not fatalistically inevitable. I think that it could have been avoided. The collapse of the breakup of the Soviet Union could have been avoided. I believe it was one of my big mistakes that I was not able to explain my policies, to conduct the kind of policies, more vigorous policies that would have made it impossible for the coup plotters in 1991 to have that coup that made it impossible to sign the new Union Treaty. We had the treaty, we had even the scenario of how we will be signing the treaty, where we will be sitting and how we would be signing the treaty. And that treaty would have opened, I think, a very fruitful chapter in a new federation, in a new country. It would have been a real federation rather than the unitary state that we used to have, a totalitarian state.
Last call quickly. Edmonton, Canada, quickly. Hello.
Mr. Gorbachev, how would you like history to judge you?
We only have 30 seconds. How would you like history to judge you? What should it say?
Well, this is for history. This is history's privilege. History is a capricious lady, but I hope that it will judge me fairly.
I have no doubt it will.
Responding to the chatter before, Stalin literally killed or gulagged most of the revolutionaries and actual ideologues in the USSR and left it with a bunch of dumb, sycophantic careerist bureaucrats. He literally contributed indirectly to the current contribution. What do you mean indirectly? He contributed directly to the corruption that ate apart the country, making it so that, like, de-Stalinization, aside from what it meant, what it came across as like concessions to the West, de-Stalinization became a necessity. Like, he was, you know... I'm not one of those people that's like, look, I can see the good in Stalin, okay? Killing a lot of Nazis, very cool. I'm on board with that. You know what I mean? That's very, very cool. Genuinely. Okay? But, I mean, let's be real. He wasn't exactly great. And saying how U.S. propaganda through Radio Free Europe, etc., convinced a lot of younger Soviet elites in Gorbachev's generation that the West truly was benevolent. Gorby gave up the USSR and Russian security for nothing and trusted the West's goodwill and promises that they wouldn't expand NATO. Yeah, that was a big mistake. And also totally didn't work, so... Muscovites react to the passing of Mikhail Gorbachev. These Moscow residents reacted to the news of Mikhail Gorbachev's passing with a sense that he did more harm than good by precipitating the breakup of the Soviet Union. Yeah, of course they are going to say that. It seemed to set us back then that he was a person who could change the Soviet Union for the better. It seemed to us back then. But then, when it was coming to an end, it turned out that he is a person who broke up the Soviet Union, broke up a vast country. There's two reasons why this is going to always be the fucking answer. One, there's nationalistic pride of being a competitive hegemonic power. And losing that is going to be the immediate reason as to why so many people are going to be anti-Gorbachev, because they're seeing him as the reason. The second is a more legitimate reason, which is economic concessions and political concessions afforded to the West that completely were undermined, taken advantage of right off the fucking jump, and have led to Russia becoming the state that it is.
Который привел к огромным многочисленным войнам, разноусобицам бывших советских республик, между народами Советского Союза. И поэтому сейчас о нем у меня не очень хорошее мнение о его жизненном пути и о его результатах.
Ну, то, что Союз развалился, я считаю плохо. Союз надо было, СССР, не разваливать, его надо было, ну, если сравнивать с самолетом или с автомобилем, модернизировать, убрать наносное лишнее к тому периоду, что мешало. Ну, мое вот мнение такое, да. Ну, попал он в историю как человек, пытавшийся изменить страну, даже мир, может быть, в чем-то.
Отрицательно отношусь к времени правления Михаила Горбачева. Он сделал много вредного для нашей страны. Мы теперь расхлебываемся.
Oh, Jesus Christ, that was good. Good sneeze. You know there were countries other than Russia and the USSR, any interest in their opinions? Yes, dude. They say it sucked. Okay, I got it. Yeah, especially ones that got better deals from the West, which had a legitimate interest in, like, you know, propping up anything and everything that could be utilized as an anti-socialist weapon. Luckily, at least a lot of those countries in the Eastern Bloc still have incredible percentages of individual home ownership. So that's pretty cool. Fun fact: look up individual home ownership rates in countries that are former Soviet bloc countries. Just a fun fact, just to figure out like where things are, or at least what remnants of socialism these countries still benefit from, while simultaneously having an anti-USSR perspective, which is understandable. Yeah. Yeah, like Top G's very own Romania that he went to has like individual home ownership rates up to 90%. Almost 90%. You think that's an accident? You think that happened on accident? You think capitalism is the reason for that? Is that why? It happened because of socialism.